When I meet a new author, I almost always ask the same question. Do you have a plan for how you want to publish? And I find that this stumps so many people because often they feel that they really only have one choice, and that is to get a Big Five traditional book deal. The other options always seem just a little bit fishy. And that's why today I want to talk about how you can actually self-publish an excellent book. I promise it's not as hard as you think. Stay tuned. You've been writing your memoir, maybe even for years. You know your material, you know what it means. What's missing isn't the story, it's the structure. And that's why we started the Memoir Method Book Club. Every single month, Emily Thrash, a professional writer and editor, teaches you how to read like a writer by breaking down a published memoir and showing you what it's doing under the surface. Your first session is free. Head over to pageandpodium.com/book club to sign up. Most of the people that I work with are very, very serious about the quality of their book. In fact, I often find that that is the reason that draws us together, because I am also very, very serious about quality and excellence. I'm very meticulous about my own work, about my clients' work. It is so important that if you are going to put in more than a year of your time, so much time and energy and hopes and dreams and all of these things that hinge on our book, if you are going to pour all of that into a project, of course you want it to be good. Of course you do. There is nothing better than that feeling of being genuinely proud of something that you produced, something that is such excellent quality that it is impeccable, that it is beyond reproach. This is the dream, right? At the other end of that, no one wants to feel like they have poured themselves into a book only to feel a little bit embarrassed about the cover design or the editing or whatever it might be. And I think that this is where oftentimes clients get really stumped. What typically happens is I will ask folks, do you have a sense of how you want to publish? Do you want a traditional book deal? Do you want to self-publish, or do you want to try to find a hybrid publisher? Now, if those terms are unfamiliar to you, this is something we have talked a lot about on this channel and on our blog, pageandpodium.com/blog. So you can flip back through there if you'd like a little more information on those 3 ways to publish and figuring out what might be best for you. But what I find is that very often when I'm chatting with someone for whom quality is very, very important, they often feel that they really only have one choice, and that's a traditional. Now, I understand this because very often in our culture, the thing that is kind of the most traditional, the thing that has been around the longest, is often thought of as the most quality thing. But of course, when we dig into this, it doesn't usually hold up, right? There are lots of types of new technology that are way better than what we had back in the day, right? I will take my washing machine over my grandma's washboard and wringer any day of the week. So the traditional, the old school, is obviously not always better, but there still tend to be 2 reasons that I find that folks get really, really hung up on why they want that traditional deal, but specifically why they would never self-publish. So today I want to start by kind of breaking those 2 things down. But then, in case you do decide at the end of this video that self-publishing may be the best way for you to get your work out there, I'm going to give you 6 tips that are really going to help you make sure that your self-published book holds up in the market against any traditionally published book. Yes, that is within reach. It is something I see every single day. It is something you can do if you choose to do it. Now, I want to give a really quick caveat, because I do not want you to come away from this video thinking that I'm telling you not to publish traditionally. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. I have 3 traditionally published books. I am very, very proud of all 3 of them, and I've helped many, many clients over the years get traditional book contracts. So this is something that I am fully in support of. If it's going to serve you, your book, and your goals for your book, Go for it. The reason I wanted to make this video is I see far, far too many authors for whom self-publishing would be the ideal path, but they're kind of just hung up on the idea that self-publishing is always a lower quality than traditional. And with that, let me get into our first phase here, the two things that I hear as reasons, justifications that self-publishing will never work for this particular book. Now, the first is that the author feels if they can't get a traditional deal, then their book is not good enough. Notice, if you are listening on audio only, I have put this in huge scare quotes. We are not going to talk about good enough when it comes to the traditionals. And the reason for that is that good enough is a very, very small slice of the pie that traditionals are evaluating when they're deciding whether or not to issue you a book contract. Now, what do I mean by that? Because I do find that most folks think it is, usually they think at the line level, like the sentences are beautiful, that's what qualifies a book to be picked up by a traditional, but that could not be further from the truth. Typically, a traditional is looking at your quality. They're going to usually be leaning a little more towards structure and the idea being interesting, but most of what they're evaluating is whether that book is saleable. And the things that go into a book being able to be sold have way, way more to do with you as the author and how your potential readers see you, whether they believe you are an expert, whether they're interested in what you have to say, and whether the particular kind of topic and approach of that book is timely, whether they can see ways to get it on the market in front of people who want it. Unfortunately, while yes, your quality does have to be good to get a traditional book deal, that is beyond a doubt, that is true. The quality will not take you up to the top. There is no level of good enough quality that you don't need these other saleable factors. And to me, when we look at that being the case, it becomes very, very clear that good enough is the least of your worries. If you are wanting that traditional book contract, it is typically much, much, much more about the activities that you are doing as a nonfiction author. This is different for fiction, but as a nonfiction author, those activities that you are doing, way, way more important. So we are not going to use a traditional's judgment of our book to determine whether it's good enough to be out there. We're not going to do that, right? Not a good idea. The second mindset that I hear come in that is the anti-self-publishing mindset has to do with the quality of a finished product. Now, oftentimes this is going to show up in a couple ways. One of those is that we will tend to judge often our first draft even, but our unedited drafts against published books. Well, this is of course a mistake. All of those books started where yours did too. They needed all of the editing and the revising and the cleanup and the development, all of those things that you're going to do, whether you get a traditional book contract or self-publish. Those are all things that are accessible to you regardless of the way. And when we start thinking about the final quality of self-publishing, one thing that I really find is that folks won't just compare their draft to a published book. They will also compare the worst example of a self-published book to the best example of a traditionally published book. Seriously, look for this in yourself. If you're someone that has a real knee-jerk reaction against self-publishing, is it because you're looking at your grandma's memoir that she just published for the family, that her grandson did the cover art and it was just laid out in Microsoft Word because the point wasn't the quality? And then are you comparing that to a Pulitzer Prize-winning Penguin Random House book? Oh, we do it so often. But here's what I want to tell you. There are high quality self-published books, and you probably just don't even think of them as self-published. But when was the last time you looked to see who the actual publisher was? When was the last time you really looked at it and said, this is a quality book? Who published it? For most of us, the answer is basically never. And what that means is we are by default putting books that we like, that we think are good quality, automatically into the traditional area, while we put all of the bad example books, the books that make us want to hold our nose and get as far away as we can, into the self-published category. But very often, if we started to actually dig through those two piles, we would find that there is actually a lot of overlap. There are going to be a lot of bad examples of published books that came from traditionals, and there are going to be a lot of really, really good examples of self-published books that the author really leaned into quality at every single stage. And this is really the entire point that I want to make in this video. When you are self-publishing your book, that is exactly what you're doing. You are doing the publishing yourself. And while there is so much expertise that goes into publishing a book, truly, the outcome of self-publishing is not going to be dependent on your limitations as a self-published author. It's going to be dependent on your limitations as a publisher. It's going to be dependent on how competent you are with the aspects of packaging up your book in addition to the writing. So, the good news is there are lots of things you can do to have a better result. And in fact, very, very often what folks find is when they start looking at what goes into quality self-publishing, it often makes sense to go with a hybrid. It often makes sense to just spend your money in one place, work with one publisher who will do all of this for you, rather than trying to break down every cost to make sure your self-published book is very, very high quality. So if you get to the end of this video and you decide, oh, you know what, actually I want a hybrid, I think that's a win too, because the point I want to make here is you do not have to work with a traditional Big Five press to have a very high quality, an exceptional quality, an award-winning quality book. You just don't have to. You can do it on your own, or you can do it with a hybrid. There are so many options, but with that, let's get into our list of tips. The first tip will be totally unsurprising if you have been in the self-publishing world, but that is, I want you to make a list of all of the components that you are going to need to publish, and I want you to research the best practices on all of those components. Now, what are the main components we need to be thinking about here? We could break this down into a list of hundreds of things, but I want to give you three: the editing, the design, and the metadata. So let's start with the editing. Now, we've talked a lot on this channel about editing, but the point I want to make here is you do need to be thinking about your editing in stages. Typically, we will recommend that you start with self-revision. Read back through that draft, make notes of what you want to change, and then make those changes. With this revision stage, you are taking that manuscript as far as you can on your own. But the key thing here is that no manuscript jumps off the typewriter in first draft form and is ready to be published. No manuscript even jumps off the typewriter and is ready to be copy edited. We have to work with that manuscript to really bring out the best in it. This is the quality that the author puts their name on, so we have to make sure that we've got quality there. So we're always going to start with revision. Highly, highly recommend at this stage that you get a developmental edit and/or a book coach to help you revise. Then, only then, once you have done all of those revisions, are you ready for copy editing and eventually proofreading. Typically, that is going to be months down the line before you get there. And that's what I want you to be researching into. Thinking about these different types of editing when you're going to be ready. We do have a blog post and video that came out several months ago on the types of editing, so you can check that out if you're wanting a little bit more information on what I mean here. Suffice it to say, we are going to research this editing component to make sure that we really understand as authors what the traditional would be doing so that we can do it ourselves. Okay, so editing's the first. The second component I want you to research is design. Now, you have probably already been thinking about cover design. I find that almost every author that comes to me is thinking about the design of that book almost from day one. But there are other components to design too, and namely, I want to point you to interior. Now, interior design has gotten much easier since we are in this world of technology. There are lots of very straightforward programs. Costs vary considerably, but most of them are fairly affordable. And I find that the interior design piece is actually one of the easier parts. Good news. But you are going to want to look into how those design components work together. How is your cover going to work with your interior? And how can you be really, really thoughtful about that process? So, second thing is design. And then the third piece is your metadata. Now, metadata is a little bit of a grab bag term because we're talking about a lot of components here. But the most important things that you're going to need are your marketing copy. So this typically is going to go on the back cover, but also it will go on any of your online retailers as the kind of description next to the book. If you have bought books, you've seen this. But you also will have to come up with some keywords that I would consider part of your marketing copy, and an author bio. There's just some kind of miscellaneous things that you'll need to come up with in terms of the text. Research this. But I also will tell you, if you look around at different online retailers, you will not only get a sense of which components you need, you'll also get a sense of how to put those together. So you can research that pretty easily, that piece of metadata. You also will have, under that metadata umbrella, you also will have the registration and the market assignation. So with your registration, typically we are talking about registering through Bowker. So this is something that anyone can do. You can do this online. It's pretty simple. There is a cost involved to it, but it's not hard to do. So when you register, the main thing to keep in mind is that every format needs its own Bowker assigned ISBN. So if you have an ebook and you have a paperback, you'll need 2 different ISBNs. You register those through Bowker. This is not difficult to do, and you do not need any kind of a license or anything like that. So you can do that. Copyright registration is something we're thinking way, way more about in this age of AI lawsuits. Copyright registration is also pretty simple. You can do this as an author, and it's not as expensive as you might think. So copyright registration is going to matter here. And then you also will need to make sure that you have looked at your market assignation. Now, all I mean by that is assigning market categories to your book. We usually have 3 kind of standard blanket umbrella categories that we're going to want to include. You can look those up. They're called BISAC, B-I-S-A-C, and you can choose your 3 categories there. There's some art to it, of course. When you research it, you'll kind of figure some of that out. But those are kind of the main components of our metadata. Metadata just being data about the data so that you are letting all of these great technologies help you find your reader. So first thing we're going to do, research those 3 areas because you do want to feel competent about those if you're going to be going it alone. The second tip that I have is to make a plan with dates. Now, I suspect you probably knew that you needed some kind of a plan, but the reason that I really want to emphasize making a plan with dates, 2 things. 1, you need to have a realistic sense of how long this process is going to take you. I find that almost no one does, truly. So that's the first reason. The second reason is one of the real make or breaks of self-publishing is your ability to manage the people that are doing the editing, the design, metadata, unless that's you. So without dates, you are really going to struggle with that. Anytime you're working with creatives, which you will be, deadlines and dates and reminders are the name of the game. Now, this is the reason at Page and Podium, we are a hybrid press, of course. We have just literally one person who just manages the logistics of things because there are a lot of logistics. And if you don't have a plan that has dates, it's going to be really, really hard to manage that. So, second thing, I want you to put together a plan, and I want you to be really, really honest with yourself about the dates. The editing portion in particular really surprises people at how much time it takes, and it takes a long time. But when you're hiring professionals for the design stuff, you also are going to have a plan because often they're booked out 6 months, a year. So you do want to make sure that you're thinking ahead on this stuff. If you don't have a plan with dates, you really can't do that. So second thing, make a plan with dates. All right, tip number 3 for excellent self-publishing. I teased it before, but it is worth saying over and over and over. Do more editing than you think you should. Do more editing than you think you should. Almost every first-time author who has not been through the publishing process, almost every single one of them, you will tend to imagine that you need about half to a third the amount of time that you actually need. I know it is such a bummer. And truly, if you have been following this channel, if you made a plan for your memoir, if you outlined, you really thought about the structure in advance, the good news is it won't take you near as long as it would have without those things. And yet, revising just takes time. You've got to give it the time that it needs, both for yourself to kind of sit with the ideas, really think about some of the decisions that you need to make in that revising stage. But also, you're going to have to leave time for professionals, for a developmental editor, and then way down the line, your copy editor, to actually have time to do the editing. It's not a quick process. And when you're talking about a full-length book, this makes perfect sense. Oftentimes for memoir, we're talking about 60 to 80,000 words. That's not a small amount of text. So when we're asking an editor to be really thoughtful about it, it does sometimes take longer than you think it should. And even for yourself to be thoughtful about it, it sometimes takes longer than you think you should. So be sure that you're being very, very honest with yourself about the amount of revision that your book needs. Definitely, if you are a very, very new author, if you have not done a lot of writing, you're going to need quite a bit more than you think. If you have some experience under your belt, it may not be quite so much, but I always encourage you to leave a little bit more time than you think. Okay, number 4. This one is a little bit of a brain teaser, but it's going to be such a game changer when you think about your mindset about self-publishing. And that is, I want you to really be very, very intentional about thinking both specific and general. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, the easiest way to explain it is going to be to give you an example. And this example is so common, it actually could have just been its own tip. So oftentimes, as I mentioned earlier, I find that authors are very, very clear on their cover. Now, when they say that, I know they typically just mean the front cover. Of course, paperbacks and hardbacks have a front cover, a spine, and a back cover. So we're already usually starting to leave some stuff out when we talk about our book's cover. But as I mentioned earlier, the cover is only one aspect of your book's design. You have the interior too. And by far, readers spend way, way more time with your interior than they do with your exterior. But does that mean you shouldn't focus on the cover? Not at all. It just means you need to put the cover in conversation with the other design elements. And this is what I'm saying when I say that you need to balance the specific, something like your book's cover, with the general, something like your book's entire design and presentation. When we are able to move between those two levels, we will always, always, always come out with a better product because we're coming out with a product that has been intentionally designed as a holistic item. That, of course, is going to be way more important than that just your front cover looks good. So, as you are going through making a plan, researching, I want you to really push yourself. Think specific, of course. You'll have to. You're hiring people to do these tasks, right? So you will need to think of them as individual tasks. But don't forget that you, as the self-publishing author, are the only one who can make sure that all of those different pieces fit neatly together. Don't forget that part. Don't get so hung up on the little cover details that you forget you need to coordinate that entire package into a book that is the actual thing people will buy. All the components together, not just the cover. Okay, number 5. Now, when I was talking earlier about the fact that most of us have really no idea which books we've read that are self-published versus big 5 versus smaller presses versus hybrids, most of us don't know. Well, that can work to your advantage as a self-publishing author, because if people do happen to look at the publisher, we do not want it to say independently published. Not because self-publishing is bad, it's not, but because of what I was saying earlier. So many people have this strange association between self-published books and bad books, and one of the easiest ways to reassure yourself and also give your book that brand advantage on the market is not to publish as a self-published author, but to publish under your own imprint. Now, imprint is an industry term that just simply means your publisher's brand name. So oftentimes a publisher will have multiple imprints under it, but smaller publishers, it's usually just the one imprint that they have. Page and Podium is an imprint. Penguin Random House is an imprint. Lots of imprints, all the imprints. So the good news is there is no official industry way that you register an imprint other than just saying that you have an imprint. When you go forward to publish it, in those places, you can put the publisher as whatever you'd like it to say. So what I always suggest to our authors who are planning to self-publish is to found an imprint. All you need to do is pick a name of an imprint. It could be your last name with books or literary or whatever it might be. It could be some special name to you with the word press after it. It can be really whatever you want it to be. And if you want to go just a little further on this tip, you can also pretty easily design yourself a little logo. It is not super expensive to hire somebody to make you a logo like that, but also with things like Canva, it's pretty simple to do this on your own if you have a good design eye. When you've got that imprint, it often can be so reassuring to yourself and your readers that this is an excellent quality book. And it isn't because self-publishing is bad, it's just simply because excellent self-publishing means paying attention to all the details. And when you have thought about your imprint, you are thinking about all of those details. And the bonus is, if you write another book, publish another book, you can put it under that same imprint, and look at that. You own your self-publishing company. We love it. Okay, my last, sixth and final tip, publish on multiple platforms. Now, this is one thing that I do find a lot of self-published authors overlook, and it is such an easy way to give your book a little bit of a boost. Oftentimes I hear when people are going to self-publish, they always want to talk about KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. This is, despite the name Kindle, not only the publishing platform for ebooks on Amazon, it's also the way that you do print-on-demand paperbacks through Amazon. So, KDP is absolutely a place that you are going to want to publish your book, but there are so many others. I would absolutely recommend that you get your book published through Ingram Spark as well as KDP. Ingram is the main kind of industry insider distributor of books, so most bookstores, libraries will order from Ingram. In fact, you will find if you are trying to get your book in a traditional brick and mortar bookstore, they will very often not order through Amazon or through Kindle. They're going to order through Ingram Spark. Now, the reason is that whenever we're talking about wholesale book sales, most of these purchasers are going to expect a 55% discount with free returns. This simply is just the industry standard. So you aren't going to make as much money on Ingram, but if you want your book to be available wholesale to places like Barnes & Noble, Target, Walmart, oftentimes the way to do that is going to be publishing through Ingram Spark. So keep your mind open to all of the different places that you can publish. There are many, many, many options, and there even is some advocacy in the industry for publishing anywhere you can, for meeting your audience wherever they are. I do not personally ascribe to that view. I think we need to do the simplest tasks that we can in the best, most efficient way. So I will typically do Kindle Direct Publishing and Ingram Spark if I'm recommending someone to self-publish. But certainly Google Play, Apple Books, there are tons of options. Think about where your readers are and don't limit yourself to only Amazon. Amazon is the go-to place, for better or for worse, that people go to buy books, but there's lots of other options too, and you want to make sure your book is where your reader is buying books. Okay, I hope these tips have been helpful as you're thinking about how to publish that book in a really high quality, excellent way. The one thing I really want you to take away from this is that there does not have to be any correlation between quality and type of publisher. There simply doesn't. There are excellent quality self-published books, many, many of them actually, especially as we have moved into 2026 and the technology is so available to us. But there also are pretty crappy quality traditionally published books. In fact, I more often find typos in traditionally published books than I do in hybrid published books. So there is no hard and fast rule that traditional is better when it comes to the quality of your book. Now, as you move forward, the main thing I want you to keep in mind is that publishing should serve you, your book, and your goals. As long as you're doing that, everything else is just gravy. Talk to you next time. Happy writing. You know that feeling when a book just hits you? Not because the story is wild, but because it's shaped so intentionally that it almost makes you rethink your own story. You finish that last page and think, how did they do that? The structure, the honesty, the clarity. There's something under the surface that you just can't put your finger on. And the reason is, unless someone shows you how memoirs actually work, it's hard to translate that inspiration into your own writing. And that's exactly why we created the Memoir Method Monthly Book Club. If you want to join Emily Thrash every single month to dig into an exemplary memoir and figure out what's happening under the surface, head over to pageandpodium.com/book club. Your first month is free, and we can't wait to welcome you to the group.